Alright, hi everybody. Thank you for coming to my Newb to Warlord series, and thanks for letting me crash your park today. It's been a bomb. So today we're going to talk about A-range fighting. So I think A-range fighting is something really important to learn in Amtgard because it's not really used, because it's pretty aggressive. A lot of people view it that way. A-range is more common in Bell, Dag, Darkon, but that's because you can like shove people out of your range. So what is A-range? Right, so if we talk about range really quickly, drop the board first. So there's three different ranges. You have A, B, and C. C range is out here. I cannot touch Sean. Sean cannot touch me. B range is when I am able to start to touch Sean with the tip of my sword up to about the first like 6 to 8 inches of my sword. Okay? And then A range is everything beyond that. Note, Sean can touch me before I can touch Sean. So just because you know your range does not mean your range is their range. Big thing to keep in mind. Okay? But typically why people in Amtgard don't like A range is because you're like here. And a lot of people being this close are like, this is scary. So I need to get out of that. So a lot of Amtgarders typically don't fight there. Okay. So now that we know what the ranges are, also if you want to learn more about ranges, check out my video on range control and movement. It'll be very helpful in this video if you don't already know how to like get into A range. But talking about the process, there's pretty much 3 steps. You first enter A range, you then do the grind, and then if you don't kill them or you don't die, then you disengage. Typically you want to win, so you just end at the grind. But doesn't always happen. Okay, so entering A range, right? How do you do that? So if we're in our stance, you can do this a couple of different ways. Typically, like when you enter into their... Here, step this way. When I enter into somebody's range and they don't like being in A range, they're going to step out. So since a lot of people don't like to fight there, you're going to have to work harder to get into that range. So typically what you have to do is you have to take this deep step, right? So now I'm really close to Sean. Or, you know, you can lunge. And when you lunge, you can do a little bit of a level change. So that changes a little bit of what you have access to. And then you can stand up into it. Additionally, you can let them come into your A range. So if they step in, you just stay. Or if they like to enter range, leave out of range, but don't want to be in A range, you can catch them if they take a really committed step. If you watch their footwork, oh, here we are. Now we can grind. Right? So check out the movement video and range control video that I have in my Newb to Warlord series. That will really cover all of the fundamentals in being able to enter A range, and it'll go into deeper depth. But assuming that you can get into that, now what about the grind? So with the grind, there's a couple of different things. First thing, actually grab your board now. Sorry. Also, really quickly, when people fight in A range, most people are fighting with board. The reason why is because you have more defense. And then versus if I'm single sword, it's much harder to defend, and the encounters are often much faster. So sword and board is where it gets really, really grindy, and these A range fights can happen for a long time. Or, you know, orders of multiple seconds. Yes? It'll still work with a small punch, but you'll have to move it a little bit more. Okay? Okay, so now we're in A range. So typically my guard is here, right? But when I step into A range, I'm going to move my guard out, my board out a little bit. So I'm rotate this way. So here, this is my normal guard. I'm going to push out, so I'm blocking more of Sean's strike zone. and I'm giving myself more protection on my outside. Okay, because rotate this way. If I'm in my normal guard, do a deep wrap. Yeah, or on the outside, right? I can get hit really easily. But if I pull my guard out, I have more protection that way. Okay. Sometimes you can bring your guard up a little bit more, and so what this does is you're already set up for different shots. Whereas now, if you're here, you can get caught up in between the boards. If you ever like see somebody try to go like this, you can catch their sword by stepping in or just pushing the board. Right, board to board contact in this game is legal. Okay. An important part of A range once you're in the grind zone is you need to maintain pressure if you want to stay there. Right, a lot of people are going to want to back out. So if you come this way, right, I'm going to step in. If Sean doesn't feel comfortable about it, he's going to try to back out. So I need to keep pressure to be able to maintain that if that's where I want to be. Right? Okay. Now, right, we're in the grind. Yeah, this is a good spot. So we can talk about a couple different things. What are our shots? This is where we're throwing shots, blocks, integrating a little bit of fakes, baits. You're really trying to use your toolbox to kill them and survive as well, right? So working to kill them as well as blocking whatever Sean is going to throw at me or your opponent. Okay? A couple things that you can think about as well in A range is you can do the heavy combo side, right? Where I'm trying to control this fight by throwing a bunch of shots, or I can play a little bit of a waiting game where here I am, I'm going to wait to see what Sean does. Does Sean twitch? Right? What? I'm trying to wait for Sean or my opponent to throw something. Like if you throw this chop, I can catch them off step or something like that. Right? Because when you throw, that's when you're going to open yourself up. So if you want to try to control the pace by throwing a bunch of shots or take it a little bit more passive and wait it out a little bit, or alternatively, you can, mix and match. You don't always have to play the heavy combo. You don't always have to play purely waiting game. Learning how to do both is really important. All right. So now once you're, say, we're fighting, this isn't working out very well, and like Sean will continue to throw pressure on me, right? How do I disengage? This is really important if you're in a spot where oh, I don't feel safe. I need an adult, right? So whenever you're fighting board, a board person, I always recommend do an offline step out into the board side, right? So I throw out while I'm stepping, because if Sean continues, I'm now threatening him. So that's pressure for Sean to stay away from me. Okay. Typically, if you have somebody that's really, really aggressive and they don't want you to leave A range, that's where you're going to have to do bigger explosive steps. Sometimes, you'll get in these instances and you both realize, oh, this isn't a great place. So we'll both just back out and reset. Okay. So that is the overall projection of A range fighting, right? It's the same as fighting in any other range, in pretty much any other combat. But one thing that, sorry, ate a bug. One thing that's important to realize is that when you're in A range, step this way. When you're in A range, a lot of the shots that you have where Amtgarders are typically fighting in mid to late B, you don't have access to, right? And the reason why is because of cone theory. Check out my combat theory class. And so really what cone theory is this is my cone of attack. And so when I enter closer, my cone is shut off more, right? If I'm here, I have access really easily to Sean's board. If I enter, it's much harder just in my small circle that I make in front of me. It's hard. I don't really have access to Sean's hips. If I want to get Sean's hips, I have to level change to get it, right? Or on the other side. So because of that, in A range, you typically are throwing a little bit of adapted shots. So the most common shot, I think, in A range is this overhead cross, where what you're trying to do is, typically you'll do this with a fake, where you'll throw and throw over, right? So all I'm doing is I'm throwing the shot over my head, overhead, and you're crossing, okay? Additionally, so the overhead cross is going to be trying to get the arm or get on the inside of the body, right? You're throwing, move the shield, or move your arm, sorry. Yeah, move your arm. I'm trying to get in. This is the best case scenario, okay? Additionally, if I want to get this side, flip me sides. There's the sky hook shot. This is, right, this is your straight chop. There's no way I'm gonna get that shoulder. What you have to do is you have to throw up over. I'm shooting for the sky. It's a sky hook, right? To get that shot, since Sean is a little bit taller than me, I have to like get into it, but all Sean has to do to block it is just lean back into the shot, okay? Additionally, you can do, to work on this outside, you can do deep wraps. It's going to be harder for me to get this on Sean because of the type of board he has. I can do a little bit of footwork with it since we're here, go around, or work around the board a little bit more, right? If I'm doing this, I'm still protecting myself because, rotate. As I step out, I'm still making sure my board is blocking between me and Sean's equipment, while I can still get his back because I'm going kind of on the underneath side of his shield. Okay, so that's this overhead cross, sky hook, and deep wrap. Additionally, there are the hip scoops. I always think hip scoops are one of the most underutilized shots in Amtgard. Rotate. This is going to work the best if your opponent's board side hip is facing you, right? If we're here, I need to be able to get underneath, right? I'm scooping. From this angle, it's really hard. But if I go level change down or step out, I can get it. Now, on the other hand, if I want that, I mean, when people are going into A range, I will like square up. I'll have a little bit of a stance. I'll be slightly canted with my board foot forward. Normally, when I fight board, I have a much more linearized stance. But when I fight A range, I square up more. And the reason why I do that is so I can get a little bit more height. Okay? So, if your opponent does that and they square up to you more, then going down and under, or now switch. If I want to get the money shot, I can step out and throw that shot at the same time. Okay? So to do that again, here I am. I step and I throw as I'm backing out. Boom. Okay? You can also do it a little bit off to the side, but it's harder to do because as you go further into the board side, you're going to be blocking off the angle. All right. Lastly, a good chop shot to do as a response is if you're fighting somebody that's really aggressive, just like start throwing shots. Don't hit the hat.
Why not?
Yeah, right. Is timing and waiting for them to throw a chop, and you step out and you just turn. All I'm doing is turning and throwing that chop. Okay. So those are pretty much your basic chops or shots that you're going to be doing in A range, but additionally, using your hips and your body or your abdomen, your core to rotate, this is going to give you a lot of power. This is where a lot of your power is going to come from, right? And you can now, once you start doing this enough, you can integrate it to become part of your fakes and setups where I'm throwing, I'm rotating my body over to get the power, right? Once Sean gets calibrated to that, I can rotate and throw, right? Getting your opponent to respond to whatever you're throwing, a stimulus, and then you don't capitalize on that stimulus, you capitalize on the opening they just made, right? So if we flip it on the other side, I rotate and then I throw, right? Boom. That's a very ideal scenario. You're gonna have to work on it. You can also throw over, doing fist pumps to do your fakes, not just the twists. Also, I think one thing that's really fun as well with A range is you don't always have to be here in this grinding spot. You can use this as your setup, right? Where, oh, they're gonna get really defensive, and if you make them bring their board out, then doing like that back step out, you're gonna open that hip, right? So flip sides. So go in your normal stance, right? But now if Sean brings his board out because I now can't get around, that hip's more open. Boom, right? Or throw. You're gonna have to integrate it a little bit. Starting out in A range, you're gonna die a lot, but that's how you learn. Okay. For doing combos, take those shots that I just went through and just begin to integrate them in different ways. Throw fakes, at different points. Just play with it. It's something that you're gonna have to get comfortable with, and figure out what fits well for you and what doesn't. So throughout this video, I've talked mostly, or this workshop, I've talked mostly sword and board. But what about with different styles? Single sword and Florentine are pretty similar when we talk about A range. Again, these don't last very long. In Florentine, it'll last a little bit longer, right? Because we're here, and you have 2 points, 2 weapons to protect yourself. If you have one, right, you're gonna have to work for it a little bit more. Using your offhand is gonna be your best friend because you're gonna get hit. There's no way you're gonna be able to block everything in A range with your sword, unless you're like God. What I like to do with A range, so I really like to fight in A range. But how I integrate A range or use A range in Florentine or single sword, we'll do single sword first, is I use it as a ploy to fake out my opponent, right? So I'll come in real deep here. Sean drew his guard over, and I'm throwing in this side, right? I'm coming over. Huh. That's not, Sean's expecting the shot to come from this angle, but I'm throwing on this side, right? Or, we can be here, step this way a little bit. We can be here, step, and moving. Typically, when I'm throwing in A range with single as well as Florentine, I'm expecting my opponent to typically walk out of my range, so I'm actually trying to throw into them. I'm continuing to walk into them as I'm throwing. Additionally, what I do is, since a lot of people in Florentine and single, they fight in these upper sectants. I'm sure you've noticed you're shaking your head. I dip because now I got these hips and they're nice and juicy, right? You can laugh. Right? So, I mean, Florentine's really nice because I can fake and throw, right? And if I'm here, okay, maybe I only got the arm, but I can follow up. Or I can back and throw, or something like that. With the point that I'm trying to get across with single and Florentine in A range is I'm not sitting here for a long time, trying to grind it out. I'm throwing 1 or 2 shots, a couple combos, a couple fakes, and then if I don't succeed, I'm backing out. And then I'm resetting and I'm trying to reset the match or reset the fight. Okay? If you can figure out how to do A range in single and Florentine for an extended amount of time without dying, please let me know. Because I would love to learn. All right. So lastly, I'm just going to talk about a couple of general tips for A range fighting. So first off, play with the ranges. Just because I'm talking about A range doesn't mean you always need to fight. Imagine I have a board. I don't always have to fight here. Right? I said you can, switch in and out. Here I am. I get Sean to move the board. Throw. Right? Or throw. Something like that. Okay? You're playing how much time you're in, how much time you're out. When people get calibrated to you fighting in A range, you're going to have to adjust to that. If they are expecting you to always do a deep plunge in, you're going to have to catch them on their step in if you want to continue to fight in A range, right? Or, if you're fighting somebody that likes to fight in A range, you're going to have to work on your back out game. You're going to have to work on your defense, and working on your offense in that case is going to be beneficial as well. Dealing with height differences. This is often one of the biggest points of going in A range. I'm pretty tall, relatively. When you have height on your side, this is where A range becomes really beneficial. If you grab your shield again. Grab your shield. So, if, Sean, let's pretend you're 6 inches shorter. That was a lot, but you get the point, right? I can go over the board way easier. Now, Sean, stand up. I can't. I'm going to have a harder time getting this wrap, right? It's going to work the same on this overhand cross. You may be able to work a little bit better on the hips if you're shorter. When you're the shorter fighter, you're typically going to have to be canted back further, just so you can protect from those high angles that are going to come in. But also realize that as you cant up, you're going to open your hips more to be shot at. So you're going to have to watch out for the level change for the hip shots, right? So you're going to have to drop down. So just be conscientious of that. Also thinking about fighting lefty fighters. So switch slides. A range, a lot of the shots that I showed you only work for righty versus righty or lefty versus lefty. Now that we're on the same side, we're on the same lane, things change a little bit. I typically don't recommend fighting A range on somebody that has the opposite handedness because your hips are really open, right? And if we're here, it's really not that hard to get up in there, okay? So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to do a little bit of a modified stance. We're going to fight your hip back, and maybe you can get the overhead on this side. You're going to have to work it in a totally different way. So just something to keep in mind. And then lastly, for really getting good at A range, you're just going to have to try it out. You're going to have to lose. You're going to have to really figure out what works for you, what doesn't. what feels comfortable, all of that jazz. So I recommend just drilling it out, finding a buddy and just grind away. It's going to be a fun time. It's also going to be a miserable time. But I really love fighting A range, and I hope you guys find this video useful. And thanks for all coming to attend my talk, well, my class. And I look forward to seeing you all on my next Newb to Warlord series. Thanks.